Let us talk about the press conference that happened at 11:30 this morning. Reform UK holding a gathering of the great and the good in the media to announce that former Tory Minister Dame Andrea Jenkyns has defected to Reform UK and will run as a candidate in next year's local elections coming up in May. I'm joined now by a man who, on the same day, has pretty much done the complete opposite. No, he hasn't gone to the Tories, but he has decided that his relationship with Reform UK has sadly come to an end. Ben Habib, former MEP and Brexiteer. Ben, good to have you on the programme.
Always good to be with you. I loved your turn of phrase.
Which particular bit of my turn of phrase are you referring to?
Well, done the complete opposite, which I thought was, well, it got me laughing anyway.
Well, yeah, almost a complete opposite, unless you're going to later announce that you are going to go cuddling up to Kenny. You can give it to me as an exclusive if you would like. But let's start off with... let's start off with this news that Andrea Jenkyns, who's the former Skills Minister, she lost her Morley and Outwood seat in Yorkshire in the Labour landslide in July. But she's going to be standing potentially to be Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire in May. I mean, this is potentially quite a good win for Reform UK. She's a pretty well-known Conservative Brexiteer, and she's saying this is the party where it's happening.
It's a great win for Reform UK. Andrea is one of those steadfast Brexiteers, and when she was a Conservative MP, I always wondered why she was still with the Conservatives, because her language and her beliefs clearly aligned much more with Reform's. But this is great. I'm delighted for Reform, delighted for Andrea, and I hope she wins the Lincolnshire election. That's terrific.
And, I mean, they've said a lot that they want to go about sort of disemboweling the Conservative Party. I think they see an opportunity, for want of a better phrase, to become the great replacement in the Commons from a Conservative Party that, frankly, people voted against at the general election because they were not right-wing enough. For a long time, I've often thought there are characters in the Conservative Party who talk more like Reform than they do the Conservatives. I've never understood why they've carried on tail-coating the brand. And Reform are clearly a party on the up. When you look at Nigel Farage's approval ratings, they're far higher than any of the other UK party leaders. And when you look at the polling for Reform, it's looking fairly healthy. People say if there was a general election called tomorrow, Reform could be heading back to the green benches with 90-plus seats, really beginning to make a dent, a sizable crater in the political landscape. And you've been a very significant part of that, Ben. And rather than stick around to get the winnings and enjoy that success, you have decided to leave. What's going on?
Well, I didn't get into politics for political expediency. I got into it because I was worried about Brexit. I was convinced Theresa May wasn't going to get it done, so I put my hat in the ring with the Brexit party. And of course, in my view, we didn't get Brexit. Boris Johnson promised it, but actually he left Northern Ireland behind. He hitched us at the hip in a regulatory fashion with the EU, including the disastrous net zero, committed us to the European Convention of Human Rights. Many people don't know that. So I think his agreement was awful. And of course, you know as well as I do that in a way the Brexit party helped Boris Johnson into office, because we stood down 317 candidates. And that was only possible because Nigel effectively owned and controlled Reform UK. And it's always been a bug. It's always bugged me. It's troubled me that the party hasn't been democratized. And when Richard approached me to join Reform UK in late 2022, I did say a prerequisite would be Nigel giving up his shareholdings, spreading it more widely. But I wasn't able to get that. I eventually got a letter from Richard saying we'd work on a consensual basis, we'd fight for Brexit, we'd fight for Northern Ireland, we wouldn't stand down against the Tories and all that sort of thing. And that worked swimmingly well. It worked very well indeed. And we took the party from 6% in the polls in March 23 to 16% just before the general election was called. But when Nigel came back, I knew that we had as a leader now someone who was in total control of the party and actually didn't share my view that Brexit hadn't been done. And that might sound like semantics to some people listening to this, but it's more than that. It goes to the heart of what it is I believe in and why I got into politics. So again, I started pushing for the democratization of the party. Zia Yusuf declared on another news channel that he had the finest legal minds producing a constitution that would do just that. Actually, when the constitution emerged, it was a document I'd seen some months ago, and it didn't do the trick. Nigel said he'd give up his shares. That still hasn't happened. And so, I don't see the party going in the right direction if it really wants to win the 2029.
The thing is,
just one last thing I'll say. And the final straw for me was hearing on the grapevine that, I've been going around banging the drum for reform ever since the general election, before the general election and obviously after the general election, and hearing on the grapevine that HQ has banned reform branches from entertaining me. And that, frankly, that's like saying, Ben, we don't want you. So if they don't want me, they don't want to hear what I have to say, that's fine,
But hold on. So here we go. Hold on. So first of all, you did actually stand in the last general election after the point that Nigel has already been made leader. You went ahead and you stood for the party then before it had changed its constitution. So you were happy at that moment. If you had been elected, you'd be sitting on the green benches. Would you still be quitting the party if you'd been elected?
I would still quit the party. I stuck with the party because I did not want to cause a massive ruction during a general election. I did speak to people close to me and express my concerns. And the advice I got was, don't do it in the middle of a general election. Remember, the election was called on the 22nd of May. Nigel came back, appointed himself leader on the 3rd of June. And I think our submissions for candidacy had to go in that week. So it all happened pretty much at the same time. But I did immediately, when he came back as leader, say, look, we've got to democratize. I texted Richard privately and said, I'm going to keep Sturm during the election. But when we emerge from the election, we must democratize. And I'm sure Richard wouldn't contradict me on that because we had text messages on the
Perhaps
subject.
you've given the party 3 months. They've been trying to set up their offices in Westminster. It's the first time they've ever had seats. They're trying to build branches around the country. They've got to work on local elections as well. All of these things, they might argue, in due course. I'm going to read some messages because while we've been speaking, messages have been coming in. A lot of the audience support reform. So I wanted you to know quite what people are saying at the moment. So Steve has said, Alex, if Ben had been effective enough to win his seat at the election, I'm sure he'd happily sat with the 5 Reform MPs in Parliament. David from Clacton says, afternoon, Alex. I had respect for Ben Habib, but after today and the nonsense he's talking, given Nigel's given up his shares, etc., I think he's a total, and I can't say that word, I'm afraid. But
Nigel hasn't given up his shares. That's the point. Nigel still hasn't given up his shares.
Now, Brad in Cambridge says that I'm massively disappointed in Ben. He was one of the reasons I ended my Conservative membership and joined Reform. He's such an intelligent man, but I totally reject his reasons for leaving. People are disappointed you're going. Was it not, if you really want to see and fight for politics in this country, and you came from the heritage of the Brexit Party and Reform are going places, would it not have been better to make amends with the party? Don't wash your dirty linen in public about them. Have these conversations behind closed doors and be part of that movement for the change that you want to see happen.
No, I don't think so. I appreciate that there will be people who used to support me who will be upset with the decision I've made. But I didn't go into politics for political expediency, to get my seat, my backside on a green bench. That's not my aim. My aim is to save the United Kingdom. The vote for Brexit was a cry from the British people to save the United Kingdom. We need a 180-degree change in direction in the way the country is governed, and we can't stand for the democratic unit that is the United Kingdom.
Surely you'd have been in a far better position to do that in a political party rather than...
Not in a political party controlled by one man. If you're standing for the democratically... If you're standing for the constitutional democratic unit that is the United Kingdom, and you keep banging on about democracy, and you say the British people must have the right to direct the government properly, you can't then say, I don't trust my own people to direct the party.
It seems to me the problem here now is you would rather sort of sling mud at Reform. You could just
I'm not slinging any mud at Reform.
No, you are, aren't you? You're saying that the party won't democratise. You're sort of...
Well, they haven't. They said they would do it. A constitution was produced. I was told that, or the world was told, that the finest legal minds in the United Kingdom were working on that constitution. Actually, when it was produced, it was a document that had already been rejected by me 18 months earlier. There were minor tweaks, and I'd be surprised if any half-decent legal mind even had a look at it, let alone wrote the document. These are big issues. These are big issues, Alex.
Well, they might think that the biggest issues are trying to organise the party to fight in the forthcoming local elections, and they can deal with reforming the constitution at a later date. Let's have a listen to Deputy Leader, and who, of course, was former leader and made you his deputy. One imagines your old friend, Richard Tice, who is speaking to Julia this morning.
We know that at least one of your former sort of leading lights is very unhappy about these defections from the Tories. Ben Habib, who used to be in the job you're in now as deputy leader, he has said in the last few months that he has quit the party. He's concerned about the policies on Northern Ireland. He says that Nigel Farage is apathetic to the issue of the demographic changes in this country from mass immigration. He wants deportations as policy. He also says your party's not a democratic party. It's still technically a limited company entirely owned and controlled by Nigel Farage and not a democratic political party. What do you say to that?
Well, that's the joy of free speech and democracy. Ben's entitled to his view, but his view is clearly not shared by the tens of thousands of people who are joining reform. We actually had a vote at the conference to change the constitution, so that's going through with the Electoral Commission so that it is a fully membership-owned company limited by guarantee. So look, all of that change is happening. People are voting with their feet. We're getting great results in by-elections every Thursday. We won 2 just last week in Kent. We got great results in Scotland. So look, we're making huge progress. And the fact that we've now got former Tory MPs defecting to us and wanting to stand for us is a very significant factor.
Is it not a worry there, Ben, that actually, that you could have given them more time, but in what you've said and done publicly, you've rather burnt your bridges. There is no going back now.
Alex. I got wind of the fact that HQ and Reform had banned branches from listening to what I have to say. I have been tirelessly campaigning for reform.
Well, that's because they probably thought you were a bit of a troublemaker and weren't really helping the cause.
Well, if they think I wasn't. I mean, I don't have to be on air and defend myself because I know precisely what I've done for reform. And Richard isn't being entirely straight in what he said to Julia. No application has been made to the Electoral Commission for the change in the Constitution. And Nigel isn't being straight when he says that he's going to convert the company limited by shares to one limited by guarantee.
How do you know that for a fact if you're no longer in Reform and no longer in those meetings? How do you know that they're doing all these things that you're accusing them of?
Because the Electoral Commission publishes all applications made to it, and I know from a legal perspective it is not possible to convert a company limited by shares to one limited by guarantee. It's a legal impossibility. And so you would need a new company, and you would again have to apply for that to be electorally registered.
But does this not smack you a little bit for people listening here, right, who really like reform or want the country to have a government on the right wing of politics and genuinely,
the left-right divide.
But do you not think that what's going on here? Yeah. What's going on here, and we saw this in the Conservative Party as well, is the constant fighting like rats in a sack.
I'm not fighting, I'm leaving.
As a result,
I'm not fighting, Alex, I'm leaving.
You didn't have to go and do sort of big videos. You could have gone quietly, one might argue.
Well, I helped create this movement. I have an obligation to that movement. I have to explain to the movement why it is I'm stepping out. It is crucial that politics in this country is changed in the way that it's practiced, that we don't chase expediency and office at the expense of ideology and doing what's right. And I will always do what's right. I didn't get into politics because I want to sit on the green benches, as I've said earlier in this interview. I got into it because I believe the United Kingdom is facing an existential threat. That threat attacks our constitution, our democracy, our economy, and our culture. And the democratic part of it is vital. And that brings us straight back to all the discussion we've had about the constitution of Reform UK. So look, I wish Reform UK all the best. I hope they prove me wrong. I hope they democratise. I hope that they therefore succeed and they can form the next government. But unless they democratise, unless they sort out effectively their ideology and what they stand for, then it's very difficult for someone like me, because I'm in it for principle, not political expediency, to be part of reform. And particularly difficult, Alex, when they tell branch members that you mustn't hear from Ben Habib. That's the end of it,
But you can understand, you might understand why, given the way you're talking about them, why they wouldn't think that it was a good idea, you going and stirring up trouble. That might be the perspective that they have.
What is trouble? What is troublesome? What is troublesome about asking a party to democratise? Is that troublesome?
Well, you could ask the party behind closed doors, some might argue.
I asked repeatedly behind closed doors, and it was promised it would be done. And actually what was produced wasn't democratisation. And I'm not in it, as I repeatedly say, for political expediency. I want to make sure that this country actually gets the government it deserves, one which believes in the nation state of the United Kingdom.
So what's your plan? To set up a new political party?
Well, I'll reflect on the best way that I can deliver this country into safety.
Ben, you are going to be sorely missed. People are saying on the text messages about reform. You had a lot of fans out there. I think a lot of people are probably feeling rather disappointed at your decision today. But thank you ever so much for coming on the show and having a natter with me. Always good to catch up with old friends. Ben and I, of course, were MEPs together back in the European Parliament with the Brexit Party. A very decent and good man indeed.